Hello everyone, welcome to this week's Life After Dev. We are super excited for one of the keynote speakers for the Dev Innovation Summit from Loksan Harley. Loksan is going to talk today about AI and AI governance and the potential future of AI in the development sector. I'm really looking forward to this session.
But AI is a question of power as well. Who holds it, who designs it, who benefits from it, and who gets left behind when it breaks. And I've noticed that debates circulating in this sector are often focusing on the wrong things. And I want to address this head on as well and perhaps try and reframe it entirely. Because the question being posed in various forms often boils down to, is AI in international development good or bad? And in my honest opinion, that the answer to that is that's kind of the wrong question. Or rather, it's too blunt a question for a world that is far more complicated than a binary allows. And here's what I know after 12 years of working at the intersection of migration, development, and now AI governance across some 30 countries in Africa, Asia Pacific, and beyond. And that is this: technology is never inherently good or bad. What determines its impact is always the same things: who controls it, who it was built for, and who is accountable when it fails. And framed in that way, the honest answer shifts a little bit because AI has extraordinary, it has extraordinary potential for international development. But the conditions under which most AI is currently being deployed are, in many places and in many cases, deeply problematic. And this brings me to the distinction that I think is really important and one that tends to get lost in the noise, and there is so much noise. When development practitioners and academics, and there are many thoughtful ones, including the ones here today, raise concerns about AI, I want you to ask them or yourselves a follow-up question. Are we criticizing AI, or are we criticizing a specific and dominant paradigm of AI? Because these are not the same thing. The AI that is eating up most of the oxygen in the room right now is the AI that is largely responsible for over $258 billion in venture funding last year alone. Also, for comparison, global overseas development assistance is a bit over $200 billion. But the AI that's eating up most of the oxygen in the room is predominantly frontier large language models, your ChatGPTs and Claudes of the world. And these are built by a handful of US-based companies and optimized for productivity, profit, and consumer engagement. According to the 2025 AI Index report by Stanford, nearly 90% of notable AI models came from the private sector, not academia, not NGOs, not governments, but industry. And quite clearly, those models were not designed with the Somali pastoralist in mind. They weren't designed with a Rohingya refugee, a trafficked migrant, or, as we heard earlier, survivors of exploitation in mind. They were designed for the paying customer, often the office worker in a mid to high income country with a smartphone, a data plan, and an account. So when we criticize AI's failures or weaknesses in humanitarian development contexts, when we point to data bias, digital exclusion, or inappropriate technology, we are often, in truth, criticizing the uncritical transplantation of Silicon Valley's solutions onto contexts that they were just never built for. Now, that critique is right and necessary. But here is where it gets interesting, in my view. Because the answer to that critique is not no to AI, as many do seem to say. The answer is different AI. And that different AI already exists, and it's increasingly powerful. So consider the alternative paradigm: small language models, open source AI, built specifically for the contexts where development work actually happens. I'm thinking, for instance, of Incuba LM, released in 2024 by Lelapa AI, a South African company, a country that I flew 11 long hours back from yesterday. And I love that name because it means dung beetle, because the dung beetle moves 250 times its own weight. And Incuba LM is a model trained from scratch in Hausa, Swahili, Isisulu, Yoruba, and Xhosa language, and it outperforms models 20 times its size on African language tasks. It runs cheaply, it can be deployed locally, and crucially, it was built by Africans for African communities on African data. No cloud subscription required, no Silicon Valley terms of service governing user data. And then there is Tihuku Media, an indigenous-led organization in New Zealand's far north that built an AI speech recognition model for Te Reo Maori, one of the world's most endangered languages. They didn't wait for Google or OpenAI to get there. They gathered their own community's voice data, built their own model, and retained full ownership of it. And their leader, Peter Lucas Jones, describes their approach as indigenous-led work in trustworthy AI. Indigenous-led work in trustworthy AI. I love that. And since then, First Nations communities and Hawaiians, Mohawk people in Canada have launched their own speech recognition projects directly inspired by that model. So these are the types of AI paradigms that I want you to hold in your mind alongside the nonetheless crucial debates about frontier AI. Open source models, small language models, fine-tuned for lower economic development and people-centered contexts. Community-owned data, deployment that works without internet and without Apple Macs. And this isn't inferior technology, because in many development contexts, these are actually categorically superior because they were built to serve the people they're actually deployed with, rather than retrofitted from frontier tools that were built for someone else entirely. So let us not allow that critique to become a generalized rejection of what AI done differently and done specifically is genuinely capable of. Because there's a category of problems in international development and humanitarian contexts where AI does not just optimize human performance, which is definitely something that it does, but it also, and without wishing to anthropomorphize, it can also do things that are categorically beyond what humans can do alone. Not because humans lack intelligence, but because the scale and speed required is not humanly possible. I'm thinking of, for instance, the UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Project Jetson. It uses machine learning to analyze weather data, market prices, conflict incident reports, historical displacement patterns to predict forced displacement in places like the Horn of Africa before that displacement happens. So not after the crisis peaks, but before. And that allows humanitarian agencies to pre-position resources, alert governments and communities, and activate response plans with a lead time that saves lives. And no human analyst, however brilliant, however experienced, could process those thousands of variables across multiple countries in real time and generate reliable forecasts. The machine can do that. And then there's Aprendia, an AI educational tool built by the International Rescue Committee, designed to run entirely over WhatsApp, asynchronously, in low bandwidth contexts, and in local languages across Latin America. It doesn't require a laptop or a school, but it requires a messenger app that those communities are already using. Technically sophisticated, perhaps not, but built around how people actually live. And remember here, these are not hypothetical promises or ideas for the potential of AI in international development. These are operational tools deployed right now, making a measurable difference. And they share something in common. None of them are about replacing human development workers, but every single one of them is about extending human reach, giving teams better information, faster coordination, and the ability to serve more people than they could without the technology. Now, I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't acknowledge as well what stands between maximizing AI's potential and the reality that most organizations working in the context I've described are facing. Now, the World Bank has a useful framework, what it calls the 4 Cs of the AI divide: connectivity, compute, context, and competency. Because over half the world still lacks reliable internet. The hardware and energy infrastructure for AI at scale doesn't exist in most low income countries. And AI models trained on Western data fail communities speaking minority languages, often silently and harmfully. And the skills to evaluate and govern AI tools responsibly are concentrated precisely where the development challenges are not. And meanwhile, generative AI adoption across OECD countries has reached over 35% of individuals, also with its inequalities concentrated heavily among educated high income populations. And the gap, I believe, unfortunately, isn't narrowing right now, it's widening. And this isn't an argument against AI, of course, it's an argument for a fundamentally different approach to how we develop, fund, and deploy it. Now, you're sitting in a room today as the future of this sector, and I want to be direct with you about what I think your role is, because I think it's a bit different from what it might have been for the generation before you. You see, the profit incentive in the broader AI ecosystem is clear. You develop more capable models, increase productivity for business, deepen societal dependence on proprietary products. ChatGPT 5.4 just launched today. You see, that logic produces remarkable technology, but it doesn't on its own produce equitable technology. And in our sectors, in international development, humanitarian response, public policy, the purpose is different. And so the standard has to be different too. So responsible AI, when we talk about responsible AI, it can't just be a slogan. It's really got to be an operational discipline. And that's what I'm trying to do through Homeland's AI. And it means not asking just, simply, does this AI tool work? But also, who does it work for? Under what conditions? With what safeguards? And what recourse is there if it fails? And it means insisting on consent frameworks that are genuine when you are collecting data from people who may feel they have no power to refuse. It means refusing to let the urgency of a crisis become a justification for bypassing the very protections that crisis-affected people most need. I've seen in my own work what happens when those questions are skipped. I've seen AI-generated outputs used in policy briefings without anyone checking whether the underlying data was representative. And I sat with rooms where the pressure to appear innovative outweighed the instinct to be careful. And I've also seen the opposite: organizations that have moved slowly, asked hard questions, and built something that genuinely worked for the communities that they served. That's a difference in governance, intent, and accountability. Let me close by returning to that government official in that sweltering office in Ghana. Now, he wasn't against technology. He was against what the technology represented in that moment: a solution designed elsewhere, deployed without consultation, and abandoned without support. A tool that amplified the power of those who built it and did very little for the person supposed to use it. That story is a warning, but everything else I've shared today is a counter-argument too. And it's a counter-argument that says the technology doesn't have to work that way, that the same year in which Frontier AI consumed billions of dollars in private capital, a team in South Africa built Incuba LM, a model that outperforms systems 20 times its size in languages that Silicon Valley never bothered to learn. The 4 Cs, connectivity, compute, context, competency, are real barriers. And the divide seems to be widening, not narrowing. But the gap between what's possible and what's being built deliberately is a political and institutional one, but not a technical inevitability. That's the fork in the road. Along one path, AI concentrates power further, and the global south becomes a testbed for tools built in the global north. And the other path requires something different from all of us working in or entering this sector. It requires bringing the same rigor that we apply to program design and monitoring and evaluation to the tools that you adopt. It requires treating AI governance not as just a footnote, but really as a core competency. The kind of discipline that asks, before deploying artificial intelligence, who built this, for whom, accountable to whom, and it requires holding the technology sector to the same standards we hold any actor claiming to serve vulnerable populations. So the speakers and students here today are asking critical questions, and a critical instinct is not an obstacle to working with AI, but actually it's the most important qualification for working with it responsibly. So my challenge to you is this: don't let caution become paralysis, but don't let excitement become negligence. The people on the front lines of the challenges many of you might be about to dedicate your careers to do not need you to be early adopters. They need you to be thoughtful adopters. Thank you very much.